Good morning. A very good morning to everyone. Thank you for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our AIT Public Lecture for 2017. China's Belt and Road Initiative, a global game changer. My name is Sean Kelly. I'm the Director for External Relations at the Asian Institute of Technology. Our institute was founded in 1959 as a unique, neutral, higher education platform for advanced regional cooperation. Today, AIT is a postgraduate institute with a proud track record of producing globally responsible citizens. This public lecture, 2017, on the Belt and Road Initiative and its global and regional impact follows in this tradition. Our event this morning features a public keynote lecture by Professor Feng Da-Hsuan, who is the Director of Global Affairs and Special Advisor to the Rector of the University of Macau. Professor Feng will deliver a lecture titled Supercontinent, Neo-Renaissance and Cultural Communication, Millennium Mindset Transformation Induced by the Belt and Road Initiative. Our program will also include a public discussion moderated by our honored special guest, Mr. Suti-Chai Yoon, founder of the Nation Multimedia Group, on what the Belt and Road Initiative could mean for Thailand and the ASEAN economic community at large. Our morning will conclude with a question and answer session open to the audience and to the media gathered today. We do have media represented from China this morning and Thailand. So at this time, may I invite the chairman of the AIT Board of Trustees, His Excellency, Dr. Subin Pinkayan, to deliver his welcome address to you all. Thank you. Dr. Subin.
Excellencies, Professor Feng Da-Hsuan, Kun Suti-Chai Yoon, President Warasak, distinguished colleagues, honored guests from China, Thailand, and around the world, member of media, faculty, staff, and students, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Asian Institute of Technology today for this special AIT Public Lecture 2017. In May 2017, China's President Xi Jinping presided over the first Belt and Road Forum. At this remark meeting, President Xi called China Belt and Road Initiative the project of the country. The plan is integrated Eurasia through a $1 trillion US infrastructure initiative, linking China to Europe across land and via sea. From the Mekong River Delta to the Central Asia Steppe and around Indian Ocean, China is funding the building roads, railways, ports, and power lines in what is being called a modern-day Silk Road. Indeed, a Belt and Road Initiative advanced by the People's Republic of China may be the largest public infrastructure program the world has seen since the Marshall Plan. Many experts opine that it will have far-reaching impact on Asian engineers, scientists, academicians, and industry. Banking also has been stimulated by China through its Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, which is an international financial institute that aims to support the building of infrastructure in the Asia-Pacific region. The United Nations has called the launch of AIIB as having potential for scaling up financing for sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, today we welcome to our AIT community Professor Feng Da-Hsuan, and distinguished scientist and scholar who will share his perspectives and knowledge on the profoundly important initiative. We are also pleased to welcome one of the Thailand's most prominent journalists, Khun Sutichayun, to our campus for an enlightened public discussion on how the Belt and Road Initiative may impact Thailand and our neighbors in the ASEAN economic community, which is now 1 year old. I thank all of you for joining us today at the Asian Institute of Technology, and I look forward to thought-provoking lecture and lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Subin. Ladies and gentlemen, our honored guest, honored keynote speaker, Professor Feng Da-Hsuan, is an American citizen who has spent the past 10 years in Asia, specifically in Thailand and Macau. Currently, Professor Feng is Director of Global Affairs and Special Advisor to the Rector of the University of Macau. He is a Fellow of the American Physical Society and expert in nuclear and nuclear astrophysics, quantum optics, and mathematical physics, with a wide range of experiences and outstanding achievements as a scholar, researcher, and leader of university comprehensive development. Professor Feng assists the University of Macau in developing their global strategies. Professor Feng is the M. Russell Ware Chair, Professor of Physics at Drexel University, and Director and Division of Theoretical Physics of the United States National Science Foundation, as well as Vice President for the Research and Economic Development at the University of Texas at Dallas. He was also Vice President of the Fortune 500 Sciences Applications International Corporation and Senior Vice President of Tsinghua University and Chung Kung University in Taiwan. Throughout his career, Professor Feng has maintained intimate contact and collaborations with universities and organizations in Europe and the United States, as well as Canada, East, South, and Southeast Asia. He has served in the capacity as advisor and board member at numerous national labs and high-tech companies in the United States of America. He has been visiting professor and honorary professor at 13 top universities in China, as well as board member and advisor for science and technology at several universities in China, Malaysia, and Indonesia. At this time, I am pleased to invite Professor Feng to the stage to deliver his keynote lecture titled Supercontinent, Neo-Renaissance, and Cultural Communication, Millennium Mindset Transformation Induced by the Belt and Road Initiative of the People's Republic of China. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm hand to Professor Feng.
PowerPoint. And the switch off. Well, First of all, while people are handling that sort of logistics, let me say that I'm greatly honored to visit AIT again after 10 years. I'm honored by His Excellency. I'm honored by the Vice Chancellor, by the President of the university. You notice that I didn't pronounce his name. It's because I find it a little difficult to pronounce long Thai names. I grew up in Singapore, and it wasn't until 2007 that I visited Thailand. And so Thailand was very, very far in my mind. And so I was a little bit surprised that it only took 2 hours to fly from Hong Kong to Bangkok. In fact, it's closer than Kuala Lumpur. You may ask, how did I get involved in this subject? I was, for 20-some years, a very, very active researcher in theoretical physics. And then I, in one form or another, got involved in high administration in universities, both in the United States and in Asia. Well, roughly about a year and a half ago, I was invited by my friend, Professor Kok Koo Pua in Singapore, who said, why don't you come to Singapore and tell everyone what on earth is One Belt, One Road? The reason why he asked me to do that is he and I have gone back many, many decades. In fact, he and my brother were in the same elementary school, and I was a few years behind them. So he thought he'll just give me an impossible task. And I took it as an impossible task. It took me 3 or 4 months of intense learning about this subject. After all, I don't represent the Chinese government. I represent myself as an academic. I wanted to know whether this subject has anything to do with anything other than economics. So that's where I am. This is my WeChat 2D code. I encourage, if you have WeChat account, please download it and start communicating with me so we can have instant communications. And instant communications regarding whatever you heard today, whether you agree with me, violently disagree with me, we can actually discuss. I think it is very important because the subject is very important. Okay. Xi Jinping gave 2 talks in 2013. Now, the dates are important. It's September and October. One in Kazakhstan and one in Indonesia. Together, they became One Belt, One Road. Remember those dates, okay? Because it's important in my talk. And here is the maps you see often, what One Belt, One Road could possibly mean. Well, if you think about it, I'm sure everybody is asking, you know, there's so many things about One Belt, One Road. How do I dissect it and try to understand it? The best example I can give is, think of it as a Chinese 炒什锦, okay? Fried noodles of Chinese. First of all, you ask in this 炒什锦 is, what ingredients? 什么料? And then, for Chinese cooking is very important, wok hei, okay? The heat of the wok is very important. In other words, how to do this in a way with ambience and with courage and so on. And of course, ultimately, does it taste good? So this is the way to think about the One Belt, One Road. Can it do anything for you and me? What does it mean? And so on. You go into the Chinese website and type One Belt, One Road, 一带一路, you will get this sentence. And I took the opportunity to translate it. 一带一路是促进共同发展等等等等. And I said that the mission of Belt and Road Initiative is a boulevard of peaceful friendship and so on and so forth. You can read it yourself. It's in very big words. And then it will also say the following, and I translate it also, intends to interconnect continents of Asia and so on and so forth. Interconnect means I connect with you and you connect with me. It doesn't mean that I connect with you only. It has to be a two-way thing, okay? That's why it's interconnect. It's not just connect. Often we think of One Belt, One Road, in some sense erroneously, that it is a one-way thing. That China comes in with money, with technology, with people, blah, 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 and you either benefit from it or you don't. But it's interconnect. So please connect that, please remember that word. In short, since it talked about the Silk Road, it is basically a revitalization in however it is done, whether it be the ancient land-based or maritime-based Silk Road. Now, we all know that in May this year, there was a huge conference in Beijing about One Belt, One Road, and 180 countries, and I think Thailand participated in a very palpable manner. Now, what are the platforms that One Belt, One Road seems to be carried on? Is it economics? Surely it is. In fact, my good friend wrote this book called The One Belt, One Road Economics. He basically outlined in it huge number of opportunities. 一带一路经济学. Okay? And in fact, it's actually, we just wrote an article in 大公报 saying that One Belt, One Road is also the Chinese way of wanting to work with the whole world, the idea of the omnipresence economy, which means the combined mobile internet with smart devices. Okay, but it also what? It is also the China-Pakistan, also CPAC. And also, it should be science and technology. In particular, I think was discussing with the chairman earlier, green technology. That's also part of it. Now you start thinking, oh boy, you know, the platforms are more and more. And it's transportation, and it's agriculture, and one area that is discussed very little, which should be global health. That clearly is something that we need to worry about. And finally, geopolitics. And sometimes people think that it is all geopolitics. For example, there are people who will write this is China's way of the new way of colonialization. Well, of course, geopolitics and economics sometimes goes together. TPP, for example, you notice I put an X over the United States now. Also the RCEP, then the Shanghai Cooperation, AIIB, so on and so forth. And I cannot help but in doing this, cannot help but remember what Charles Dickens said in his famous book, It's the Best of Times, it's the Worst of Times. It's the age of wisdom and age of foolishness. I think if you compare sometimes the speeches or recent speeches of Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, you will know the wisdom and foolishness comparison. And great similarities, I say, between the 21st century and the 19th century of Dickens. But there is one big difference. Thomas Friedman said, the world is flat. In fact, without the flat world, it is inconceivable that Belt and Road Initiative is even possible without the flat world. So you think it's not so long ago in the late 20th century when, for example, at the time where Hong Kong reversed back in sovereignty to China, and China said, let's do Belt and Road, people would say, you're crazy, because it wasn't ready then. And with the world being flat, the interactions between people and people, nation and nation, and culture can just be more and more and more intense in a way that we have never thought of before. So what sort of millennium global mindset transformations can the Belt and Road Initiative induce? If all it does is economics, science and technology, and so on, yeah, it's great. But it's not doing something so profound to humanity. And we must look for that in the 21st century, because in some sense, we are facing tremendous challenge of the survival of not a nation, but the survival of the planet Earth. So there are three global mindset transformations that I can think of. The first is the idea of the supercontinent, which I'll talk a little bit more. The second is New Renaissance. And I love this picture, David with pants on. And the third is cultural communications. Think about it. We do very little cultural communications as human beings. You know, we travel a lot, but we don't understand each other very much. So with these three mindset transformations, I truly believe that China and all the countries that work with China can reinvent themselves and make the world for the generations to come. So let me give you the genesis of how the first two mindsets came about. I ask you to remember 2013, September and October, Xi Jinping gave the talk. At that time, I was in Taiwan's Tsinghua University. So for one reason or another, I didn't hear about it. December of that year, we had a very important conference, which is the 23 top universities in Europe, which includes Oxford and Cambridge and so on, the vice chancellors and presidents, and the 17 top universities of East Asia, not including Thailand, this is East Asia, so Hong Kong, China, Japan, South Korea, South Korea, came together. And anyway, I'll talk a little bit. And then in 2015, I went to Singapore for a conference, and this good friend of mine, Lo Hui Bun, told me that the essence of your talk presented at that conference was the inherent meaning of BRI. That shook me. So what did I talk about? Well, here's the conference, so I'll go through quickly. And here are the 17 universities from Asia, the 23 from Europe. And it's the first time in memory that leaders of universities in Europe and East Asia discuss educational issues under the same roof. And here's the title of my talk, Supercontinent and New Renaissance. And actually, as this was, at least for me, two new concepts, I was actually quite uneasy in giving that talk. Had I known Xi Jinping gave the talk 2 months before, that talk I would be shouting and not murmuring, okay? Because in thinking now, there's so much involved. And the genesis of the third new mindset that I mentioned earlier, in January 17, 2017, this year, Xi Jinping in Switzerland gave a talk. And his talk said the following. There's a phrase in there, basically say economic globalization has powered global growth, facilitated movement of goods and capital, advances in science, technology, and civilization, and interactions among people. how to stimulate interactions among people. Well, and on November 5th, 2016, there was a conference on Belt and Road in China. And this gentleman, who happens to be the former deputy chair of the China's Insurance Regulatory Commission, gave the following talk. Of course, it's in Chinese, and I translate it for you if you don't know the Chinese. It says the following, and it's very important. This is a very important sentence. A fundamental point about Belt and Road Initiative is cultural communications, 文化相通. Indeed, only through cultural communication can one establish a communication paradigm, and only then can one realize BRI's development strategy, pushes forth BRI's construction, and creates projects in reality. So, cultural communications. Okay, those are the reasons why I thought those three are important. So let's first talk about the first two mindsets, supercontinent and new renaissance. Well, what is a supercontinent? Well, I'm sure ever since you're a little baby, you start looking at this map. And I think you, just like everyone else, would say that, aha, North America looks like a continent. It just geographically looked like one. South America, for sure. Africa, yes. Australia, New Zealand, of course. But what about Asia and Europe? That's a very strange one. It's one big piece of land. Somehow we thought of that as two continents. Okay? And I urge you to take a look at this beautiful book called The Myths of Continents. Actually, we don't really understand. When I became an Asian, and some of the Europeans here became a European. And yet, even though I've lived in the United States for 30 years, I have no trouble thinking myself as an Asian. And a European that has lived here for many, many years have no trouble thinking, oh, I'm a European. It is deep-rooted. So let me give you my non-scientific explanation. After all, this separation is a long time. My non-scientific explanation is that the 5 nations in Central Asia all finish with the word stan, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and so on. It's very interesting that the total population of the 5 is less than 70 million. We all know that United Kingdom is 63. Guangdong province in China is 102. Okay? So what that means is, essentially, it's empty in the middle, lots of people on both sides. And throughout the millennium, it's difficult to go back and forth. So after a while, everything changes from one end to the other in anthropological change and historical change and conceptual change. So it's not difficult to think that they start to think of it as two continents, even though they're in the same land. So I said that separating Asia and Europe is an artificial delineation, but it's deep-rooted. So can the BRI break this mindset? Okay? Well, what are the possible outcomes if that is true? If that is true, is that it could induce a new renaissance. In the 21st century, something else happened which could have a deep impact on crisscrossing action. And that we know is called the high-speed rail. High-speed rail will become ubiquitous in East Asia and Europe. Thailand is just talking about the first high-speed rail, probably within the next 3 to 5 years. Well, we have to give the Japanese, of course, started in 1960s, but now perhaps the most spectacular development in the high-speed rail is China, of course. In the past 16 years, in the 21st century, China constructed over 20,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. I remember that 2008, Obama said that the United States will have high-speed rail, and to this day, I still have to see the first inch. And now you see China's high-speed rail is everywhere, literally everywhere. So Let's imagine the following. The 21st century and maritime Silk Road will look like the following. In other words, this and not the camels. Now, the difference between land travel and so on, and air travel is the following. If you fly from Bangkok to London, well, what will you know? Well, I just came in yesterday. I must say I was overwhelmed by the gigantic size of your airport. You know, it seems I'm walking from one end to the other. It just seems never end. It's a beautiful airport. So I will notice the beautiful airport of Bangkok. And when I reach London, and I don't know how many of you have been to London lately, not that beautiful London airport. But that's all you know. You know nothing in between. Now, many of you probably drive to work in the morning, right? May I suggest tomorrow you walk? Okay? You will see things you never see. You see shops. You will see people arguing. You will hear people talking about different things that you never see. This is the difference between air and ground transportation. I'll give you one beautiful example. A good friend of mine who did his undergraduate in one of the Taiwan universities, and he's a Malaysian and went back to Malaysia, become a businessman, made oodles of money. Then when he retired, he said, what do I do with my life? I want to do something that I've never done before. I actually call him, you know, in China during the Han Dynasty, there was a great explorer called Zhang Qian who went from China all the way to the Black Sea and back. Well, I call him the 21st century Zhang Qian. Here he is in his van. He and a bunch of friends set up this tour, and this is what he did. He drove from Singapore to London in 2 months. Okay? It could be faster, but he would stop lots of places. So he showed me some of the pictures, remarkable pictures. This is the Xinjiang-Tajikistan border. Reminded me of Texas. And basically he told me that, boy, in those 2 months, I learned about economics that I never learned before. On the ground, I saw cultural transformation from one area to the next. I also learned politics, how people talk about politics, how people actually think on the ground. So seeing these truly fascinating and rare photos that brought to mind that if and when the Belt and Road Initiative is successful, these empty highways could become busy thoroughfares. When that happens, can we not already see the formation of the supercontinent? Now, Neo-Renaissance and the implications. That's even more important. Well, back to the conference that I talked about. The universities that came from Europe were all formed or started before, during, or after the Renaissance, somewhere between 14th and 17th. Of course, Cambridge and Oxford started in 11th centuries. And we know that Europe as a continent induced a Renaissance. So if Asia and Europe becomes a supercontinent, can it also induce a new Renaissance? And when Asia and Europe conceptually becomes a supercontinent, what will happen? Well, it's very natural that at such a historical conference, we could start talking about the role of universities in the Renaissance. The role of universities, just like AIT. You know, why should we have an AIT? Why not have one? What is so important about AIT? Or any universities in Thailand, in Malaysia, or anywhere else? Well, whenever the Renaissance is discussed, we all know that one inevitably thinks of the so-called maestros. Who are the maestros? Well, we think of them as Galileo, Descartes, Copernicus, Francis Bacon, and of course my favorite, well, almost my favorite, Isaac Newton. My favorite is really James Clerk Maxwell. Of course, he's way after the Renaissance. What he did in these 4 simple equations, I'm a physicist, so they look great to me. They're so beautifully written. 4 equations describe all electromagnetism, everything, in gory, gory detail. And the reason why you and I are still using the cell phone today is because of these 4 equations. Now, I'll give you a little story about myself. My mother was a musician. She was actually a pianist. She's the first Chinese woman student to study piano at the Juilliard. And so I got excited when I learned Maxwell equations. I told her, she said, I'm not impressed. And she said, I think Chopin is greater. And so I remember those words. So whenever I tell my students nowadays about, we all talk about general education all the time nowadays. There's one thing we need to tell the students, is that human intellectual creativity has no boundaries, has no disciplines. They're all fantastic. So I always put Maxwell equations with the nocturne of Chopin next to each other. And anyway, sorry, it is getting off. Now, these are really epoch-changing giants, yes, but are they essentially the distilled essence of the Renaissance? The answer is no. During the Renaissance, universities were being ubiquitously established all over Europe, and I think it is not an exaggeration to say that the Renaissance created one of the greatest social movements in human history. What is that? It deepened the person-to-person dynamics. People start to understand each other. Self-realization. By the way, that's very important. I hope AIT students, when they graduate from here, would say, I understand myself. Okay? I understand myself. And lifted humanity out of ignorance. And that's very important. And these universities attracted, tens of thousands of students, just like AIT here, to effectively and systematically push forth humanity's understanding of nature, of culture, and ultimately of oneself. It is not always recognized that together with giants like Newton and Copernicus, there were other students who attended the same classes. Next to Newton, there was some maybe dumb students sitting next to him, but learning exactly the same subject and absorbed the same knowledge. While most of the maestro's classmates did not produce work of the same level as that of the maestros, they, in their own diminutive way, had contributed in the magnificent development of the Renaissance. And this is the supreme contribution of universities to humanity. This is the supreme contribution. And this opens up a glimpse of the reason for the existence of universities. Okay, now, let's come to 21st century. The 21st century platform is essentially constructed by the 20th century's transformation. An example of this transformation, well, in 1913, the great Indian Tagore was the first Asian to win the Nobel Prize. The first Asian. Now, when you win the Nobel Prize, hopefully some of you young guys will someday win it, you will be given a line by the selection committee. And he was given the following line. This was in 1913, remember. The line was, he has made his poetic thought expressed in his own English words. If it stops there, it would be great. But it didn't stop there. It says, a part of the literature of the West. So in the beginning of the 20th century, the sense of superiority was deeply embedded in the psyche of Westerners. This sense is displayed nakedly in the last few words of Tagore's Nobel byline. A century later, Mo Yan, a Chinese, won the same prize, and this time the language is completely different. So what happened? These two bylines demonstrate the transformation of the East-West attitude, just as universities during the Renaissance welcome a cultural ambience. Universities in the supercontinent will also create and perpetuate a new Renaissance. Unfortunately, we are in 21st century. 21st century is full of severe and human-created challenges. Just yesterday, something happened in Spain. Hatred between people. Population explosion, global warming, global economic tsunami, poverty, ignorance, disease, clean water necessity. I think we talked about it with the chairman earlier. He's an expert in water resource. This is a big problem for 21st century challenge. Energy shortage. But there's something happened also, is that internet has made people in all corners of the globe equal. Now, this is the guy who wrote the book, World is Flat. He said, when I was writing The World is Flat in 2005, and he wrote it again in 2010, another book, he said, I never thought that the world become flatter. And the reason is in 2005, there were no social media. There were no smart devices. Today there are. But we also know, in fact, we know very well, the earth is still warming and it's getting warmer. Now, with the stunning scientific investigations carried out to mitigate global warming, and there are so many fantastic research from all over the world in universities. I'm sure AIT is one of them. It is clear that it is necessary, but not sufficient. I think the not sufficient part just comes out right away, okay? So, Thomas Friedman basically said, perhaps the current human modus operandi obviously cannot solve the problem. In other words, if Copernicus insisted on using the Roman Catholics' view to try to change that the earth is not the center, he will not be successful. He will need a new scientific methodology. He will need a new thinking. And that is what the Renaissance brings to the world. So let us postulate how the new Renaissance may assist humanity. Well, for sure, I think it will be a new, totally, completely unprecedented, a completely new culture when East and West truly come together. And there will be new generations of Descartes and Copernicus and Bacon coming out from universities. And the great giants of the new Renaissance, together with their classmates armed with an amalgamated cultural background, will surely propose breakthrough ideas and methodologies to overcome the challenges of humanity. This is what the Belt and Road Initiative can ultimately deliver to humanity. This is why I became so mesmerized by the idea of the Belt and Road. It isn't just another high-speed rail, which is very important, another economic development. It's the idea that perhaps through this, we as human beings can start thinking in a new way to make sure the survival of our planet, the survival of humanity. Now, the third mindset transformation, and what is the most upstream challenge I said earlier? Well, it's cultural communications. And why is this a challenge? Well, some of you probably have seen this picture. Jack Ma speaking to Trump. That happened about 9 months ago. Ignore Trump, okay? Look at Jack Ma. The way Jack Ma, if you have not seen this, go back and see it. It's on the web. The way Jack Ma talked. Suddenly he transformed himself in the body language of Americans. He talked in the way that Americans understand it and using the terms and so on. In other words, he penetrated into the psyche of the American population. And that's very profound. Find another Chinese that can do this for me. You have difficulty. Okay? So, Jack Ma is unique in that sense. Now, I said that it is natural to associate BRI with the ancient Silk Road, and the inherent meaning is, of course, a millennium paradigm. In the ancient days, of course, like I said earlier, Zhang Qian tried to explore. Nothing much happened after he did that. One very important thing that did happen was Tang Xuanzhuang actually went to India and brought back many of the original Buddhist scripts and came back to China and translated it into Chinese in an understandable, succinct, and complete manner. And that's how Buddhism actually flourished in China. There was another very important person, it's called Zheng He, and during the Ming Dynasty, he came to Southeast Asia, India, Greater India, that is, and he was a Muslim, so he went to Mecca, East Africa, and so on and so forth. I'll say a little bit more about him later on. Now, the other thing is that comparing the ancient Silk Road and the modern one. Well, if the ancient Silk Road was a two-way traffic, we should see two-way traffic. Now, I don't know whether you know this or not. During the Han Dynasty in China, over more than 2,000 years ago, the Jews that lived in the Palestine began to realize this great nation somehow out in the east. So they, through the Silk Road, came to Asia. And by the time it reached the Song Dynasty, which is about 1,000 years ago, in a city called Kaifeng, some of you may have been there, Kaifeng had over 8,000 Jews historically living completely as Jewish communities with synagogues and all the religious things that went with it. So, there's a Western joke, of course, that Chinese are Jews of the East. By that we meant that Chinese know how to do business. So a natural question is, why so many Jews can congregate in China and we never heard of so many Chinese congregating in the West? The ancient Silk Road was not artificially, but organically created. There was no Xi Jinping in those days. It just happened. Except for Zhang Qian and Tang Xuanzhuang that I mentioned earlier, there's little or no mention of Chinese businessmen utilizing the Silk Road to do business in the West. We can discuss this later on. There's plenty of reasons for that. But it didn't happen. Perhaps for a millennium, maybe even longer, China and Chinese did not venture outside its natural boundary. You know, many of you may know, if you know Chinese at all, China's written as 中国. 中 means center. So from a cultural perspective, the ancient Silk Road caused the Occidental West to have far more influence on China than the vice versa. And what about today? Well, today China is trying to change itself. This is the Guizhou's Radio Astronomy Observatory, not far from here, okay? Not far from here. And also leadership of China touches every corner of the world. And here was the Belt and Road Conference in May this year, and Sarajevo in Bangladesh. Malaysia invited China to build this deep sea port. CPAC, the Pakistan corridor. And of course, earlier this year, the train that from Yiwu, China to London has started, and there are more now. And of course, the so-called Shanghai-Singapore Rapid Rail, the branch between Shanghai and Kunming is already done. Now, we're now talking about moving all the way down to Bangkok. And here is the Chinese discussion of how this started. I took a little time learning about Thailand for this project, so I'll say a little bit more here. I hope that we can have more discussions about this later on. Because I think this is very important. Something that surprised me, and it's purely my ignorance, okay, that Thailand is technologically strong. In fact, to many in Asia, people refer to Thailand as the new Germany of Asia. thinking that Germany sort of represent this high-tech manufacturing leader of Europe. And Thailand is the Asia's Germany. So the difference between this train that's coming from Kunming to Bangkok and the train that Malaysia has just signed 2 weeks ago is that for Thailand, good is not good enough. It has to be superior. For Malaysia, I hope I'm not insulting my Malaysian friends here, good is enough. And that's the big difference. Okay, that's one point. And second one I learned is that this was competed between Japan and China, and actually Japan offered 1 to 2% of interest in building this, and China's 2 to 3% for a multi hundreds of $million of project. 1% difference is a big deal. Okay, it's a lot of money. I don't know, maybe not a lot of money to you, but it's a lot of money to me. And this made the discussion lasted a long time, not to mention intense discussion. And finally, of course, Thailand's leadership made a geopolitical decision. Let's do it. And I hope we can discuss this later on, because I think this is very interesting, especially perhaps Thailand could be one of the shining examples of how to interact with China. Shining examples. It is not easy. China is a complex nation. China, as I said, tends to look inwards. China does not understand a lot of other civilizations. Perhaps in this case, Thailand could take, I know that, I always tell people, Thailand is like the American Quakers. The American Quakers has a famous way of behaving, which is, if I have something good, I will not tell you. And I think the Thai has so many good things they need to tell the world. The fact that I did not know that Thailand is the Germany of Asia is shame on me, but maybe also shame on you. Okay. Now, the Chinese are now covering the earth, as you all know. Once you talk about Chinese covering the earth, you think of two companies, Huawei and Alibaba. And, well, I said something about Alibaba already. Huawei, it turns out that when I was in Texas, my neighbor was the co-founder of Huawei. So in 2004, he invited me to visit Huawei. At that time, Huawei's annual revenue was about $6 billion. And at that time, Samsung was, I think, over 100 billion. So actually, I asked my friend, Zheng Baoyong, I said, do you think one day China will be able to, Chinese company will be able to be as big as the Korean one? And he said, Chinese simply don't have that ability to think that big. That was in 2004. Well, last week I was in KL. 10 years ago, I drove from the airport to downtown. Every few kilometers, you see gigantic gigantic advertisements of Samsung. They're all gone now. They're all replaced by Huawei. So I think that Chinese mindset is also changing, and they're everywhere. Maybe Samsung's this didn't help either. But what is the biggest challenge that China has moving around globally? It's cultural communications. Now, we all know that crisscrossing Europe and Asia is a dream of millennium. Here's one, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan. None of that did any real fusing of different culture. And the second possible outcome of BRI, I said, is that the China and Chinese transform their mindset from outside in to inside out. This is a millennium mindset transformation. Now, Europe and Asia should be amalgamated into supercontinent, as I mentioned earlier. In order to execute the Belt and Road Initiative, nations and regions with different histories, cultures, languages, and indeed ways and means must learn to effectively communicate with one another. Okay? That's not easy. To render BRI successful, China must increase its understanding of the political, economic, and cultural, even history, environment of at least some, if not all, the nations along the way. In Europe, in Africa, all the way to 1.6 billion Muslims, Russia, Southeast Asia. Now, I want to bring out one example. It's not the only example, but I think it's a big example, especially today. And that example is India. Okay? That example is India. Well, we all know that India and China are standing face to face with each other in a geopolitical conflict at the moment. And also during the May conference of this year, India's foreign secretary made it very clear India will not participate. It's okay. But my feeling is Belt and Road is a long-term thing, but geopolitical conflicts are usually short-term. So if we think of all these things in terms of geopolitical timescale, we generally will make a lot of mistakes in the long run. In fact, the Reserve Bank of India's chairman said that China should not be seen as should be seen as inspiration and not competition. Now, I pick India because for three reasons. First, I was born in India, it was mentioned earlier. And second, if you think about India, India is particularly intriguing and is one of the most complex and convoluted nations in culture, history, as well as ancient and modern political structures. It's part of the BRICS, so to speak. India is one of the toughest, if not the toughest, challenges for China to develop BRI. India has 1.26 billion people in southern flank of China. Like it or not, it's not going away. Nor can it be wished away. By the way, the vice versa is also true for China. Okay? The 1.4 billion people north of India is not going away, nor can it be wished away. It has 29 languages, maybe more, but that's what I got from the Google, and each has 1 million speakers. And both are economically increasing, although India in general, the total number is still far behind China at the moment. But it's also interesting, for thousands of years, India and China were and still are neighbors. And India profoundly impacted China with Buddhism. India was the first nation outside of the communist bloc on January 1st, 1950, to recognize the People's Republic of China. And before 1962, for thousands of years, India and China had essentially no conflicts. And even that conflict, if you really look at the world's level of conflicts, it's a relatively small one compared to, for example, the Second World War, the way the Japanese invaded China. India also has two firsts. I don't know how many of you realize this. It has the first Asian to win the Nobel Prize, Tagore. It also has the second Indian to win the Nobel Prize, this time in physics. For any of you doing science and technology, you would know Raman spectroscopy. Oh, by the way, I was given a proposal to review about a few years ago, and someone is doing Raman spectroscopy, except he spelled R-A-M-E-N. So I said that anyone that cannot tell the difference between good science and good noodles should not be funded. India's global impact, think about this. I don't know how many of you look at these guys. Okay, who are these people? These are the top American universities presidents. They're everywhere. There are only one Chinese at that level. There are 15. And also, many Indians are now American business school deans and engineering school deans. And a high percentage of them will become presidents somewhere, eventually. And also, they are what? They are CEOs of companies like this. Okay? Now, another very interesting, and again, it's a sort of side story. If you take any random collection of parents of Caltech students, You see lots of Asians, you know, they love to send kids to great schools. Of course, Indians too. But when this series of television called the Big Bang Theory, some of you may have watched it, who did they pick? They picked an Indian, okay? I love this guy. He's so cool. And also, the president of Carnegie Mellon has just been announced to be the new president of Nanyang Technological University. And also, every weekend, you can hear Farik Zakaria, an Indian Muslim, to talk about geopolitics. And anything on medical issues is Sanjay Gupta. Now, so you can see that from cultural communication, Indians are way ahead. I don't know why. Perhaps it's worth doing some research on that. And the Indians are able to culturally understand the way civilization operates in the United States. Now, also, since I mentioned earlier, on January, how much time do I have? Should I stop pretty soon? Okay, all right. So let me quickly say, let me just skip this part and we can discuss this later on then. Okay, good. Okay. Here's something. I learned a sentence that a famous person in China also said the following. Oh, first of all, Nehru said the following: if China and India hold together, the future of Asia is assured. This was said in 1946. And then a great Chinese who said that only when China and India develop well can one claim that the century of Asia has come. If China and India strengthen cooperation, Asian unity, stability, and prosperity will be very hopeful. The world will be in peace and make more progress. Who said this? Deng Xiaoping. Okay? So cultural communications. So let me go to the summary here. The BRI must enhance and deepening understanding of different cultures. And China needs to comprehensively understand all countries along the BRI route. India and China, as a major global nations of profound and ancient cultures, should aim to create a better future, not for just themselves, but for humanity. Sometimes they forget. Now, China is actually halfway there. Here's the moon. Kennedy said that in 10 years, we will have a human being standing on the moon. When the nation leader expounded such a clear and succinct grand vision, it motivated the entire United States to do just that. And 10 years later, it happened. So therefore, using Kennedy's moon goal as the metaphor, the top leaders of China had made during the visionary and pronouncement that the moon of China is one belt, one road. Okay? The moon of China is the one belt, one road. From unthinkable to thinkable. BRI can create a supercontinent. It can induce a new renaissance. Okay, let me skip this part. The ancient Silk Road was neither a creation of China, nor did it demand China to understand the cultures of other civilizations. Today, the world is turned upside down. BRI is a Chinese culture, is a Chinese creation. This places an unprecedented demand on China. Perhaps the most significant demand is how it can preserve rich and robust culture while truly attempting to understand other civilizations. So, since BRI initiative and cause a global transformation and change the rules of the game, as the title of this workshop is, how should China be transformed in order to play in the same sandbox? The rule is cultural communications. Okay. All right. I think that with this example, perhaps what we are now observing is that the profound implication of BRI is China's attempt to redefine the meaning of a powerful nation. Power is measured not just in the military and economic might, but also in cultural communications and the dignity of humanity. Ultimately, the success of BRI cannot be measured, cannot be the success of China only. It must be the success of the entire world. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Feng. I would invite you to the stage for the next session. So ladies and gentlemen, to lead the next session in our program, AIT is greatly pleased to welcome someone who really needs no introduction in Thailand. However, for our foreign friends in attendance today, Mr. Sutichai Yoon is one of this country's most recognized and highly respected journalists. Mr. Sutichai is the founder of the Nation Multimedia Group, which is one of the largest multimedia companies in Thailand, involved in publishing, broadcasting, new media, and education. The Nation Multimedia Group includes the Nation newspaper, Kruntai Tulakip Daily, Thai language newspaper Komchat Luk, Thai language political magazine Nation Weekender, Nation Channel, Kruntep Turakit TV, and Komchak Luk TV. Recently, Mr. Sutichai has led the company's diversification to new media platforms, notably the trend-setting Nation Innovation Center. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the stage Mr. Sutichai Yoon for our dialogue session to continue our program this morning.
Okay, good morning. I hope you can hear me at the back there. It was a very interesting presentation, Professor Feng. And my first question, in fact, what struck me immediately after you finished was whether you work for the Chinese government or not. Do you have anything to do with Xi Jinping privately, unofficially? None.
None. I spent a lot of hours thinking about this issue simply because I found it intellectually so alluring.
Mm-hmm.
And as an academic, I just cannot stop thinking about it. I don't work for the Chinese government.
In fact, they should pay you now.
Sorry?
They should pay you now.
Well, anyway, in fact, for a long time, you notice that I refer to this as the BRI.
And not
This is
OBOR,
That's right. In fact, OBOR was created by me.
Oh, and you changed it.
I only changed it recently because, after all, this is their official translation, so there's no reason for me not to use their official translation. But until about 5 or 6 lectures ago, I sort of insisted on using OBOR because I said that I want to make sure that I am speaking as me and not as as not the Zhongnanhai's view. And I'm not even sure whether Zhongnanhai agrees with what I said, but it doesn't matter. As an academic, this is how I see it. This is what I thought China could possibly do, and if they could do this, something profound can happen.
But why is it that you have not mentioned anything negative at all about this project? Why is it all good stuff? Nothing can be that good in this world.
Well, I think you asked very, very profound questions. I did ask myself, what bad things can come out? Okay? Well, one bad thing would come out, and in fact, I sort of indicated, maybe I didn't say it clearly enough, is that when I say that China needs to have a millennium change of mindset, then in my mind, that the Belt and Road Initiative can be successful. My next sentence would be, perhaps China wouldn't change that. And if they don't change that, then they will meet with all kinds of resistance and difficulties. I see very clearly, I visited Malaysia recently, and I hear negative views about the One Belt, One Road. And most of them could be summarized in the following form: that the Chinese do not understand the way Malaysians' ways and means.
Right.
And the way the Malaysia ways and means are not just among the Chinese. They're also among the Malays and so on. The way I see that China talk about Malaysia quite often is only in terms of the Malaysian Chinese.
Yes.
And even a small component of the Malaysian Chinese. And I think that's China needs to think a bigger picture. I don't know enough about Thailand, but I would think that, for example, if you go to 3,000 universities in China, how many actually engage in deep research about Thai culture and ways and means?
Very little, very few.
I don't know of any. That's China's problem.
Well, there are
So-
some universities in southern China
Yeah,
that do that,
that's right.
but not enough.
That's right. And that's, I already indicated that, so perhaps if I want to push back on your point, is that this is China's weakness.
But does
the Belt
China
and Road-
realize that?
Why is the Belt and Road so amazing? Is because, for me, it seems to be able to open up the Pandora box of China, try to figure out what is the weakness of China.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And my next question would be that if China opens up the neo-Renaissance,
Right.
is China ready for that? Because it's going to be two-way things. Cultural communications will also come from outside.
That's right.
Is Xi Jinping ready to listen to viewpoints that are different from what the Communist Party of China believes in? Is China going to allow their young people to have real good cultural communications with the outside world and come back and challenge the authority of the Communist Chinese?
Well, that's a $64 million question, of course. One of the, I'm still optimistic. Okay, I am an optimist, and so I see that China has progressed, like I said, unthinkable ways.
Yes.
Give you one simple example, just a quick one. It doesn't have exactly how to answer your question. I arrived in Shanghai in 1981 in Pudong Airport. And I look out, it was a United Airlines coming into Shanghai midnight at night. I look out the window, it was pitch dark.
Yeah.
Of 10 million people. At that time, it's only 10 million. In other words, China just looked pitch dark. I went into the airport, and I wanted to go to the bathroom, and I saw a PLA soldier standing at the gate, and
Yes.
it was totally dark inside. So I asked the PLA soldier, why is it dark inside? He said, oh, the light bulb went out this morning, and we could not find a replacement.
Right.
Okay,
So
so
it was only 10 years ago.
this is 1981.
Okay.
Okay? So, China has changed. China literally has combined the mobile internet with the smart device and created what I call now the omnipresence economy.
Yes.
That's why I urge everyone to go on WeChat. Because through WeChat, you can communicate with China in a way that you could never done before.
Right.
And you can create your own group of people within China and interact with them and learn from them, and they learn from you. So is China's Xi Jinping ready to listen to other people? Well, Xi Jinping will have to listen to other people if the people around him are sophisticated enough. Those I have met, I have not met all of them, those I have met, I saw a big, big difference in the way they think and talk than the Chinese officials of just 20 years ago. So that's why I say that China, if China introduced the One Belt, One Road just in 1997, when Hong Kong reversed its sovereignty, no one will believe him. Why? Because between 1983, when Deng Xiaoping and Margaret Thatcher started to talk about the Hong Kong's future, and at that moment, Hong Kong's GDP was 1/10 of China. Little Hong Kong.
Right.
By the time the 1997 came around, it's only 16%. In other words, it increased very little. But in the last 20 years, it changed. China surged 12 times in GDP. And Hong Kong now, GDP is about 2% of China.
That's right.
Okay. So you see, everything exploded in the last 20 years. 20 years is a very small time scale for a nation. And I think that clearly the outside world had no time to adjust to the Chinese change. Neither the Chinese inside China had enough time to adjust to the Chinese change.
That's right.
But the adjustment is coming. And adjustment is literally thrust upon them. And so for the young entrepreneurs I met in Guangzhou, in Shenzhen, in Shanghai, even in Chongqing in the last 2 or 3 years, I found them to be open-minded. I found them to be extremely interested in the outside world. Even right now, the discussion, the animosity between India and China, you would think that these young people would have very, very harsh words towards India. No. Probably there were far more harsh words in India than there were in Chinese. I have 2 colleagues. China figured out recently that India's salary is low.
Yeah.
India has a set of great universities called IITs. And these young people in China figure out, we can recruit them. So 2 of them that I know personally were recruited from IIT Guwahati to a university in Guangdong province with 5 times the salary increase.
Wow.
And the 2 of them said that when they went there, the people were so friendly to them. Not because they just loved to work with them and so on. So my feeling is one of the biggest change in China in the last 20 years, perhaps because of the 12 times an increase in GDP, is not its scientific increase, which it has, not because of its economic increase, but the mindset change.
Well, I agree with you. At the intellectual level, I think we see great changes taking place. The mindset is changing. My question is about the leadership and whether the leadership really is ready for that really major change in what you describe as the cultural communication. We see that the Chinese are now going out of China and experiencing new ideas. But when we look at the political leadership or the political policy that is still being exercised, I do not see major change. In fact, in certain areas, it's even more rigid. The control and command mentality becomes even more serious. Look at Hong Kong yesterday. Hong Kong is an experiment of a free society, free economy. China would like Hong Kong to be the free economy for China, but not the inherent political life, the way of life of Hong Kong people. Yesterday, the court sentenced this young dissident to, Joshua to 6 months in jail. And Chinese authorities in Hong Kong do not allow any real dissident. Increasingly, China is not tolerating what is happening in Hong Kong. That makes me suspect that back in mainland China, that so-called cultural opening up is possible at all. You think really the Chinese leadership is ready for a gradual political improvement, for the people to be able to be more outspoken, more creative? You cannot have creativity without at least some level of freedom of expression, right?
Well, you know, one has to, I think everything you said is true.
Thank you.
And
because I thought you were going to say, no way.
no, everything you said is true. I think that at the moment, there is great exercise of control in China.
Greater, because VPN has just been terminated.
Right.
VPN is the great China wall,
Right.
the digital China wall. We're not crossing the China wall. When I go to Beijing, any Chinese town, I make sure that I buy the package, internet package from here, so I can use line from Shanghai, Beijing. Because if you use the
Cannot anymore.
hotel Wi-Fi, you cannot use
Right.
Google, Facebook, and all this. But there was this little VPN system that you can cross the China wall, the digital China wall. Now they're closing that down too, right? So when you go to China, what do? WeChat.
Well, actually, people can still climb the wall and get into Facebook. My friends all do
They
that.
can do that.
Oh, yeah. they
But you
still
have to
that.
do it very discreetly.
I don't know how discreet, but I have not done it myself because I just didn't bother. But my friends who live in Shanghai all do that. So in principle, they can do it. And I don't know how prevalent that is. So I'm not disputing you. I'm just saying that it can be done. But we have to probably look at the issue of China is a very complex one.
Yep.
It's 1.4 billion people. And this 1.4 billion people essentially has no history to follow.
No.
The only country that has more or less the same population is India,
Yeah.
which can, of course, India has no control of any kind, practically.
No.
Yeah, okay.
Chaotic.
I mean, India is the Wild West.
But
so
there
to
are the
speak.
Indian friends here.
I
They can
hope
tell
that
us.
I'm not insulting my Indian friends here.
I'm inviting all the Indian scholars here to challenge Professor
Right.
Feng.
Absolutely. So I think that when the nation is so large, how to make sure that the nation can move forward is a very difficult issue.
It is, yes, I
Okay.
agree totally, yes.
I don't know what the population of Thailand is, what about 50 million?
70, 65.
70 million,
yeah.
okay. That's smaller than Guangdong province.
Yeah, we are smaller than
Right.
Guangdong.
And Malaysia is, I think, 30 million. So these are, by and large, these examples of nations like here cannot be used for China.
No.
You're too small. In fact, even 300 million Americans, a country of 300 million like the United States, may not be good for China as an example. Okay? I always say, if United States is 1.4 billion and not 300 million, Will it be the same? I think those are the issues.
They will still have Trump.
Well, already you have Trump, so so I'm not a politician. I don't know how to answer your question, but I think that
I'm not expecting an answer from a politician. I'm expecting an answer from an academic, an expert on Chinese affairs.
Well, I would hope that that the Chinese, as time goes on, I do not see China ever become a democratic country.
No.
Okay?
You have no hope.
Nor should it. Nor should it.
So it will be democracy with Chinese characters.
It's actually very interesting. Let me tell you something that I'm not an expert in this, but I'll bring it out for everyone to think about.
Yes.
Democratic processes of government is a relatively new thing in human society. So is communism. For sure, so is Chinese communism, which is totally different from the Marxists and so on. So we're all experimenting, so to speak. The democratic process that we hear, in the United States, do you think that this is the only way to run a society? May be coming to a cliff. And many countries, including the one I was in for 7 years in Taiwan, is also coming to a cliff. And so we need to look at democracy operation, its pros and cons, just like the way we need to look at communism's pros and cons. And every country, as they move on, and of course, every country is moving on dynamically, not statically. China in the last 30 years have dynamically changed. For example, we all know about the June 4th issue in China. Now, will the Chinese publicly say that that was wrong?
Never.
It will not. But de facto it has. Why do I say that? The economy of China started to transform rapidly right after that.
Right.
So de facto it has said that. So you can see that people react in ways that maybe not the way we want them to, but in fact they could do that. Now, come back to your ultimate question. Will people like Xi Jinping and so on? As we can see, Chinese leaderships are changing 1 year. Every generation is changing. I think the current generation is probably very different from the Xi Jinping, from the Deng Xiaoping generation. And for sure, Deng Xiaoping is very different from Mao Zedong.
Sure.
And
although some people are saying that Xi Jinping is trying to become the 21st century Mao Zedong, consolidating his power.
I don't have any data to prove that one way or another, so I'm not going to comment on that.
We have to have another seminar
That's
on
right.
the
That's
Chinese on Chinese political leadership.
Right. So I think now, having said that, I think other countries, the world is now flatter, even for China. Other countries will also have to play a role in the growth of China. That's why the Belt and Road is so important, because China is inviting other countries to come and participate within China. Start with business, for example. I don't know I'm sure you know this. 5 years ago, the price of durian in Thailand is stable.
Right.
Not true in the last 2 years.
No more.
Okay? I was in Malaysia now. 1 kilogram is 100 ringgit.
Right.
Okay? and they think it's going to go to 200 pretty soon.
Right.
Why is that the case? I said earlier, the reason is because 300 to 400 million Chinese are reaching middle class. And the middle class people has a much bigger voice than those who are not middle class, whether you like it or not. And so this middle class people want things, and there's interesting between China and India. Now you say, why aren't Indians middle class can do the same thing as the Chinese middle class? Very interesting. I mentioned already, because India is a pocket of many, many different people, different languages. So they don't think collectively in India. But the Chinese are mainly Han. They think collectively. And if this group of collective Chinese of many hundreds of millions, you make them think in the same way, that becomes a business. All of a sudden, 400 million Chinese like durian.
But that's big trouble for us.
Well, either a problem or a challenge or
A lot of Thais are complaining that we are eating
you
expensive
cannot eat
durian.
your durian, yeah, but it's a business now.
Yeah, but the farmers may like it. You see,
Yes.
durian growers
So
may
somebody
like
it, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and the farmer's livelihood has got. So I think it is also important for countries such as Thailand and Malaysia to look at China's as a tremendous market,
Yes.
and using the market as an inroad to transform the Chinese mindset that you think may be important. You and I are not going to change Xi Jinping's thinking,
No, we're not trying.
or trying to, okay? But even if we try, it will not happen. But if the business community, if there are opportunities, if the Thai people start thinking the Chinese market is an opportunity for Thai's well-being, economic well-being, then I think more and more interactions. And I think with the Belt and Road, it is encouraging that to happen.
So the big question of the discussion now is, how does Thailand, or in fact any ASEAN country, benefiting from the One Belt and One Road initiative? How?
Well, first of all, I think, I don't know exactly about Thailand, but let me give you the way some other countries perhaps could benefit from it. I was in Singapore recently, and Lee Hsien Loong was talking about, in fact, I attended the China program, what did they call it? China Future Conference. And the highlight of the conference was Lee Hsien Loong having a conversation with Robin Hu. I don't know whether you know him. He used to be the SCMP editor.
Yeah, I know him.
It was a great. And Lee Hsien Loong was still talking about, Singapore's finance and financial transparencies, and Singapore's law situation, and so on and so forth.
Not about his brother and sister.
No, not about his brothers. Not that night.
No.
And in fact, we wrote my colleague and I wrote an editorial saying that these issues that Singapore wanted to do, they will have to compete with, for example, London. They will have to compete with New York and Frankfurt. Now, they may win for a short time, but in the long run, it's not obvious they will win. Okay? And secondly, many of the countries in the Belt and Road that would want to be benefited from this is coming from basically the third world. And many of them were former colonies of the European countries. So the European countries have had many, many years of understanding of those countries, far more than Singapore.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you want to play this game, you may not win. in the long run. So we thought that Singapore and maybe even Hong Kong needs to think out of the box.
Yep.
For example, Thailand and Malaysia and Singapore and Hong Kong, and to a certain extent, even Taiwan, benefited enormously from foreign workers. I don't know about Thailand, but for sure Malaysia is. And I think Thailand also, maybe not as much.
We do.
In Malaysia, there's 6 million foreign workers. Of the 30 million people, 6 million are foreign workers. If you add up all the foreign workers in the world, which are roughly about 200 million, the amount of money that they actually earned is bigger than UK's GDP.
Really?
Yes. So there's an opportunity of creating a financial system in places like Singapore and Hong Kong to allow these money to flow into it, give them some good interest, and guarantee that the money, the investment will be made into their mother countries.
Right.
And many of their mother countries are along the Belt and Road. So it's a win-win. They need to think like this. They need to think out of the box.
But for Thailand,
For Thailand, well, I think in some sense Thailand can do that too, but not as well as Singapore, probably.
but the Chinese are telling us that with that railway system,
Yeah.
we can sell a lot of goods to China.
Right.
But at the same time, we know that with that, also a lot of Chinese goods will flood Thailand.
Right.
And will kill local products
Right.
as well.
Right.
So this is a two-way thing.
It has to be a two-way thing, and so the Thai entrepreneurs will have to learn very quickly. First of all, my feeling is, I said earlier, that the Chinese don't understand the Thais very well.
They don't
probably-
think they need to understand.
But they must.
That's the problem.
That's
They
a-
don't realize that yet.
2,000
You
years
have to
ago-
speak at all these universities in China and tell them this,
Absolutely.
that you have to understand other people more.
Absolutely. Because in some sense you have to, because you're bigger. You have a bigger responsibility. Okay? If you're a big brother, you talk to your smaller brother,
Yes.
you need to have more benevolence than the smaller brother.
This is exactly the message we would like to send to China.
Absolutely. Okay? But at the same time, you know, the Chinese, 2,000 years ago, Sun Tzu
Yes.
said, you got to understand each other. No, he talked about wars. I hope we're not talking about wars here.
Economic war.
But we need to understand each other. Only then can you do things. But sometimes I think the Chinese have forgotten that.
Well,
And so now-
that I think is the main issue now. And that is
Absolutely.
with China becoming so influential, so big, the economy, the political
That's the
maneuver,
whole point of-
especially now that Donald Trump has made China great again. It is even more worrying for us because the balance of power has now been tilted towards this side. And it's not very comfortable when you have a big brother saying, hey, we'll build a train, a railway, train all the way down to Malaysia and Singapore. And we're going to give you this loan, but we're going to charge you 3%. And we turn around and say, but the Japanese friends only charge us 1%. And they say, no, forget them. You need us more than you need the Japanese. Because we have so many tourists coming to your country. You have 10 million tourists coming to Thailand. So we are now giving you more benefit than the Japanese and the other countries. And if we do anything that offend the Chinese, the number of tourists could just disappear, which has happened in South Korea, in other countries. So China is using all its economic muscle to pressure other countries to do things their way. Is my concern valid or not?
To a certain extent, it is valid.
To a great extent, because it's happening. It's happening. And we know that even in negotiating the Thai-Chinese railway project, they have met 19 times in the past 3 years, and they are going to meet the 20th time.
Right.
They have not finalized
That's right.
the issues.
As I understand it, the issue of finance is still being discussed or debated. And also, at every stop, which would, in principle, would have development of businesses and real estates, and whether China should participate in those are also being discussed. So those are issues I think that your government will have to find a solution to. And I'm certainly beyond my pay grade to tell the Thai government how to do this.
Yeah.
But let me say that, again, I don't want to defend China, okay? I'm not here to defend China.
You can try.
But let me tell you the way I look at it from a historical point of view. Thailand is probably I don't know whether you noticed not, recently the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policies of National University of Singapore, Mohabani. You know him?
Of course.
Okay. Mohabani is having a debate with some of Singapore's politicians.
Yes.
You probably heard that.
Yes.
And his main point is how little countries should behave. And the other side gets very angry with him and so on. Well, I don't know why Mohabani didn't talk about Thailand. Thailand is probably the world's best example of how small country behaves. Why? Because we all know every country in Asia, Asia Pacific, were colonies, except Thailand. When the when the British and the French, the Thais make sure that the British and French play between the two, and so remain independent. When the Japanese started to attack Asia in the Second World War, the Thai worked with the Japanese and allowed the Japanese soldiers to use Thai to come down to Malaysia. In fact, if you look at Singapore, when I grew up, all the guns pointed south.
Right.
Because they were expecting the Japanese to come from the south, but they came from the north.
Right.
It's because the north allowed them to come in. So again, because of that, Thailand was not occupied by the Japanese. And right after the end of the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese had interest in making much more inroads into Indochina. They already went into Cambodia. They already treated Laos as their little country, as a little brother.
Yeah.
And probably the next one would be Thailand. And Thai, instead of asking the Americans to help, they asked the Chinese to help. And so, in many ways, Thailand has always learned how to do this, because Thailand is a relatively small country, like you said. So it should do the same today. Okay? It's a perfect example of the wisdom of a people to remain vibrant and independent, at the same time economically strong.
I'm not too sure about that.
Well,
thank you anyway.
But history tells you that Thailand has remained that way.
Yeah, but the real reason behind that may be more complicated
I'm
than
sure.
that.
I'm sure.
We're not that good. We're not that wise. We were confused. We didn't know what to do, so we just smiled, and the Japanese didn't understand what we were saying. So we survived. And this is a true story. Officially, the American writers or these people who wrote Thai history may be very kind to Thailand. But we Thais, as you said, we know something, but we won't tell you.
You know, why don't we have a major workshop of this to discuss this in AIT so that people truly understand what small countries could do?
Great, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, we get the president to organize it.
Absolutely. This is, you know, a good historian said the history is the hardest thing to reproduce.
Right, it's true.
Okay?
Yes, yes.
And a friend of mine who is a fantastic historian said, historians better not be innovative.
No.
Okay? So I think that this is what a university needs to discuss that.
Right.
And Thai's position. Now, in terms of the economics, I think that this is just my view. I put it on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Thai's business entrepreneurs there should be enough centers where you can train the Thai entrepreneurs to work in China, work with China. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, in the 1980s, when Taiwan, even under Jiang Jingguo,
Yeah.
he said, okay, I keep my eyes closed. If you want to do business,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Don't tell me about it.
Don't tell me about it. So people started to go. A good friend of mine who is Tai Da Dian's a company went into China in 1985. Today, his company has 100,000 workers in China.
Wow.
So this is, now Taiwan has only 23 million, even less than you.
Good.
So I think this is what Thai businessmen need to do. Learn from the Taiwanese.
Mm-hmm.
How did they do it?
Mm-hmm.
China is opening up, keep on saying, one belt, one road is not a one-way direction. It isn't just China coming in with the money. It isn't just China coming in with the technology. It is for both countries. So we want Thai entrepreneurs. The same thing in your Durian people are now doing business in China.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And every day, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this would be a tremendous opportunity. Now, is Taiwan one day going to be 400 million people? No, that will not happen.
Mm-hmm. No.
So you need to find new ways.
Mm-hmm.
So learn from what the Taiwanese are doing.
Mm-hmm.
How did they do it? Mm-hmm. And there, you know, next to Macau, there's another area called Zhongshan, where Sun Yat-sen grew up.
Yes.
Now it's all Taiwanese businessmen doing LEDs technology.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So all this can be learned in Taiwan. Macau, your entrepreneurs can learn very quickly. The other thing I said, we in fact just wrote another article about Malaysia's, and maybe this has something that could also imply here. Mm-hmm. Malaysia claims that building this railroad, some of the people say, well, you will not hire local people. Mm-hmm. Okay? Well, it turns out that the foreign workers, of 6 million foreign workers in Malaysia, are the people that do all the menial hard work.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So if China comes in and give companies the business, the company will go ahead and hire foreign workers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And still will not benefit the local people.
No.
So this is something that both Thailand and maybe less so in Thailand, but certainly quite a bit in Malaysia, that needs to be looked into it. It's not as simple as just China coming in and hiring. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Finally, I would say that again, universities in Thailand, AIT could be an example, is that have a lot of training programs here for Thai entrepreneurs, for Thai workers. Ask the Chinese technologists to come in. For example, the new high-speed rail is a very, very complex system engineering. Now, but Thai's technology is pretty advanced. So put Thai's technology and Chinese together at AIT, for example. I'm only use this as an example.
Yeah.
Then you can upgrade the huge number of local entrepreneurs in terms of the technological knowledge that is going to be disseminated all across Thailand.
Yeah, I think that's very good suggestions, that the Thai side will have to do a lot of things and ask the Chinese government
Yes,
to support
That's right.
in this attempt.
and in fact, in the discussion of the railroads and future, this would be part of the discussion and not ignored.
Wow, the floor is yours. Indian scholars, please, because we are talking about a very big project from China. And please be frank.
Yeah, thank you, but I don't
Please
talk
introduce
about
yourself.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. I am Kumar, the Vice President of Academic Affairs at AIT and a professor in MSc here at AIT. I have two questions. The first is this very innovative initiative. How do you see it in the next 10, 20 years, both in China as well as elsewhere, taking into consideration, like what you mentioned, in 20 years, a lot of things have changed in China. For example, about the leadership. Will the next line of leadership would also follow the same path? And what would it be with the other countries which are involved? So, a sort of a prognosis next 20, 30 years. The second, sorry. the
Let
second-
me answer first, okay? And then you can ask again. I think this is a good question. The same question could be asked by any country. You know, right now in India we have Modi, and he will not be there forever. What will happen to India? Or, God forbid, when Trump leaves, what will happen to United States? I think what will happen in the leadership, as it moves on at the moment, I think that for the next 5 years at least, when Xi Jinping is there, it will be a fast train moving. Now, after he's gone, my gut feeling, and many of my Chinese friends think, that even if the name changes, the essence will not change. So we're talking about a 10, 20 years of transformation of China. So I believe that there is going to be continuity in this project. And if the continuity maintains, then I think that there will be a lot of fundamental change in the thinking of the way people do things. And that's very exciting. Okay, next question.
So you think that it's going to continue the same way as what is planned today? The second one is also a little bit continuation of the first one. It is, if you look at the current 21st century challenges, poverty, climate change, how is this initiative going to impact these important challenges both in China as well as in the countries involved? Because obviously it looks like more of economic initiative in one sense, which countries think about it. But what about the people in the lower middle class and people with $1 a day, especially in Asia as well as in Africa? How do you think it's going to impact?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Let me rephrase your question if I'm wrong.
Climate
please.
change, the social upheaval, how would that impact the
Well,
major powers?
In fact, China now, my understanding is that China is going to place green technology to be one of the major areas of transformation in the One Belt, One Road. Now, what we see, of course, is high-speed rail and all that stuff. But they're going to talk more and more about green technology. In fact, a good friend of mine who, his name is Michael Celia, who is chairman of Princeton's Environmental Institute, is a great thinker in this area. He's very worried. He's worried just like the way that Thomas Friedman worried. And he said that, you know, the earth is just not getting better. We need to have new ways of thinking. And so he was quite interested in the One Belt, One Road from the point of view that One Belt, One Road perhaps could change people's mindset, especially the leadership mindset of many countries. And that's why I personally got interested in it also. Now, how will that help the person in $1 a day living standard, which, by the way, India has a lot, and China has some? I think that as long as people start to think that wealth distribution is a fundamental political policy, in some way, that is to make sure that more and more people in the lower class can be uplifted. With that statement, I must say that I'm very impressed with China, that lifting close to 700 million people out of poverty.
Yes.
No countries in the world had done that. And I think but also there is a price. But because the Chinese become middle class, they're consuming the earth's resources more.
That's true.
In a faster pace. So China, because it is such a huge country and is consuming more and more resources simply because people have more and more expandable income, need to pay even more attention to green technologies, to environmental issues. And I must say I'm happy to hear that's coming out of China today. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was a report, I think by CNN recently, that China is actually paying more attention to that. Well, for one thing, the cities of China with the smog is intolerable. Okay?
Yeah.
Beijing's intolerable. Now, in the past, when China was poor, well, you know, the factories were also spilling up those things. But when people are that poor, they don't pay much attention to it. But now the middle class say, hey, we don't want to breathe this dirty air.
Especially in Beijing, where people cannot breathe properly.
Yeah, it's terrible. But by the way, so is New Delhi. New Delhi's smog is equally
also bad.
Equally bad. Okay? And so in some sense, here it is that India and China, instead of worrying about the border, why don't they come together and talk about, with 40% of humanity in India and China?
Yes.
40%. 1.2 billion plus 1.4 billion. Both people are highly interested in education. You know, Indians love their children to be educated, just like Chinese would love their children to be educated. Come together and solve the problems of the world. Clearly, Trump is not going to solve the problem of the world. Okay?
You create more problems.
They create more. But India and China can. And they're next to each other. And look at history. For years, thousands of years, there were no conflict. Only 1962. A relatively small conflict compared to the wars of the world. And let's just bury that and move forward for humanity. That's how I see this.
Mr. Kumar, can I ask you a question? Why is India against the One Belt and One Road project? There must be a good reason. Please, stand up, stand up. Yeah, make your point.
I don't know whether India is against One Belt, One Road initiative.
It is
but
clear, the Foreign Secretary, right, Professor?
The thing is, I think it's not very clear what exactly One Belt, One Road initiative is going to deliver. And that was my question. In 10 years' time, 20 years' time, what will it deliver to the world?
Well, one of the official reasons is India is against this project because the road that is being built will go through Kashmir, which is a border issue, right, Professor Feng? Is that the official reason?
No, I don't think that's the official reason.
What is the official reason?
The official reason is very interesting. According to the
You don't know the official reason,
Yeah.
so we have to listen to Professor Feng.
The official reason that's given by that was that China wants to do this. But China did not consult India. Okay? That's one of the reasons.
Why would China have to consult India?
India said that, look, we are a major player in Asia. If you're going to do something major in Asia, should you not talk to us? Now, maybe they didn't. And I think that by not participating in the May conference is actually hurting India in some sense because you don't want to participate and it's hard to have a conversation. But I think perhaps the forthcoming BRICS conference in Xiamen, where Modi, as far as I know, will be going, despite of the Nepal problem, perhaps they will be starting some discussions. The other thing I think we need to remember, Indians are in fact voting with their feet. By that I say, I don't know whether I skipped that just now because of the time. I'll repeat that. The country where the most Indian students pursue education outside of India is United States, no doubt. The second, third, and fourth, I don't remember the order, is Britain, Australia, and Canada. The next one is China. Indian students are going to China. Right now, there are over 15,000 students from India studying in China. A fact that few people seem to know. And this number is increasing very, very fast. Why? Well, because I think intellectuals in India are realizing that China is not going to go away. China is... I met the Indian, I think it's called the Minister of Education, I don't remember exact title, when I was in Tsinghua. We led a delegation and because we want to build relationship with the universities there. And he told me something very interesting. He said, look, we all know that China is growing exponentially. And we need to compete and interact with China in a substantial way. This was about 4 years ago. He said, but I have a problem. The problem, I want therefore to institute the policy in India that all the secondary elementary schools could offer Chinese as the third language. Wow, I said, 1.2 billion people is not your 70 million people, you know?
No, yeah.
And he said, but we have a real problem. The problem is that he asked me, do you know how many people in India that knows Chinese? Well, I thought, with 1.2 billion, maybe 1 million? He said, no, less than 1,000.
Wow.
Okay?
Really?
In other words, I'm a mathematician. In mathematics, there's a term called isomorphism. This is isomorphic with zero. Okay. In other words, none.
Insignificant, totally insignificant.
Totally insignificant. If you have 1.2 billion in 1,000, it's nothing. And I said, well, you have 1.4 billion above you. Why don't you bring some of them? I said, well, politically, we cannot because of the 1962 conflict. China created, with China, we created this subliminal animosity among the government. I think in general, the people have less and less that feeling, but somehow the government level is still there. And I think here, again, both universities can do a lot. And perhaps, again, come back to AIT. Perhaps AIT could be the platform where Chinese and Indians can come and interact in a big way.
Are they not already doing it? No?
Not in a big way.
Not yet, not enough.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
Professor Feng will provide the Chinese side.
Yeah. So I think that this, clearly Thailand needs to understand India. Thailand needs to understand China. Bring them here and bring the top Indian academics. I tell you,
When the big elephants fight, we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
when big elephants make love, it's even worse.
That's right. That's right. So you just want them to be friendly.
Yes, very friendly.
India has something that China does not have. A very good friend of mine, B.R. Deepak, who is the professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. JNU is the Harvard of India. You know what he's fluent in Chinese. He is fluent in Chinese literature, and he even just completed translation of the Confucius Analect into Hindi.
Hindi.
Okay? So India has a level of intellectual strength that is so strong that it doesn't exist in China. There is no Chinese counterpart who could say that I understand India so well that I can take the deepest Indian literature and translate it into Chinese.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around.
Which is a
So
pity.
now you see that things are happening, but I think that universities need to do much, much more. And only universities like AIT can do this. And I think Thailand is the perfect place to do it right now.
Okay, more questions, please?
Thank you, sir, for your fantastic presentation. First, let me...
He doesn't think so.
Introduce yourself.
Yes,
You look very
introduce
interesting.
myself.
Yes.
My name is Huang Zhirong. I come from the southwest part of China, Guizhou, Guiyang.
Guizhou, yes.
Yes. Have you been to Guiyang, sir?
No, I have not, but I showed the radio astronomy
Yes.
from Guizhou.
Welcome to Guiyang. Because I'm the Yao nationality of China,
Yao.
because of some historical reasons, so Yao nationality is a worldwide nationality. Some Yao people live in USA, Canada, France, and majority is Asia. China is a huge population, and Vietnam, Laos, and other countries. So because now China has a One Belt, One Road huge project. So, and the Yao people, we met each other this year in Songkran Festival. The Yao people in USA, they visited Thailand, Vietnam, Laos. So we sit together and discussion. Finally, we finalize, 5 countries, USA, China, Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos, the Yao society. We think we should help each other and share information with each other. So we finalize, we think we should have a Yao worldwide conference in turns each year. And in next year, 2018, the Yao Society in Thailand, they agreed to have the first international Yao conference. And this year, in the May June, July, I stayed 3 months in the Yao Society in Chiang Rai. And the Yao people, the majority is a farmer. They plant coffee, tea, and other fruit. So, sir, can you give us some suggestion? Because 2018 March will be the first time for our Yao World Conference. So the five countries, the Yao nationality, will sit together and discussion how we develop each other. And because next year is the first time in Thailand, so we hope Thailand, the Yao society, can get more beneficial from this event, and also depending on the One Belt, One Road from Chinese government. So, sir, can you give us some suggestion, and also including AIT, because I'm a PhD student in AIT. So maybe Thai government, Chinese government, and AIT can give some support to help Yao society in Thailand, is the north part of Thailand.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes.
sir.
She's from Chiang Rai, which is to the north of the country. And this will be the first international conference of the Yao people next year in Chiang Rai. Next year. So what, Professor Feng, what is your advice for the Yao community about One Belt, One Road initiative?
I must say I know very little about the Yao people. I have met some Yao people when I visited Yunnan province. So, and I know that some of their, the way they operate and so on. I think Yao people is a very important part of China, even though the population is, compared to China, is very small. I don't know what is the total number, probably only a few million, is that right?
What is the number of the total Yao community around the world?
All right, so 2.8 million. Okay, so
2.8 million?
Yeah.
Only in China?
In China.
Wow.
2.8 million in China. So but I think it is important that the problem, or either the strength or the weakness of China, is that they are a nation of 95% of the same background, Han. And so the Chinese generally don't have a deep understanding of other people's civilizations. Unlike the Indians, someone from Tamil is very different from someone in northern India. In fact, the language is completely different. They'll have to speak Hindi or English to each other in order to communicate. But China, from the tip north to the tip south to the tip west, generally Mandarin's okay. But then there's small communities, small. I mean, 2.8 is not small, but compared to 1.4 billion is small. 2.8 is a very important, it's like a glass of water. If you add another drop of water, you don't change it. But you add a drop of ink, you change it.
Yes, yes.
And that's this minority in China can do. And so the minority in China should play a major role in letting Chinese think how other civilizations behave, and also how other civilizations, and respect it with dignity. That's very important. It's really not, in some sense, not in the Chinese psyche to do this.
Not yet, but they will have
Yes,
to learn.
but they'll have to. And that's again why One Belt, One Road is important. So this conference, I hope, you will make a big noise, okay? And you will make the conference, hopefully, in Thailand. And let me offer our president, your president, for you to bring the conference here. I'm kidding, okay? I'm kidding. Yeah.
So
And-
the ink, a drop of ink in that glass of water
Yes.
will make a difference.
That's right.
But don't drop a drop of poison.
Yeah, don't drop a drop of poison. That's right. So that's what I suggest you should do.
Yeah. Any more questions? Maybe.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Yes,
First
please.
of all, thank you for the wonderful presentation. My name is Ajay Kusumadikari, and I come from Nepal, and I'm studying MBA in School of Management, AIT. And I have a two-parter question. Since a lot of countries have participated in the One Belt, One Road initiative, is there a risk of forfeiting their political sovereignty? And my other question is, what is the competition for China's OBOR? And if there are other countries that have been flirting with the idea of initiating something as similar to OBOR, which countries can do so, and what would be their risks? Thank you.
First question is political sovereignty, right?
Sovereignty.
How would it affect political sovereignty of each country taking part in this initiative?
I think that was almost the same question you asked, in a sense.
But you haven't answered that yet.
Let me say the following. Again, you know, these are tough questions, but I will give you a historical perspective, because I think we need to think in terms of that. I mentioned very briefly in my talk, Zheng He, who was the gentleman, a eunuch, who was asked by the Ming Dynasty emperor to spread Chineseness, if there's such a word, to the world defined in those days. So he constructed a big naval ship. There were 300 naval ships, together with 30,000 soldiers, and went all the way across Southeast Asia to what India in those days, which include Bangladesh today, which includes Sri Lanka, which includes Pakistan, and eventually also went to Mecca, West Africa, and so on and so forth.
He also came to Thailand.
And absolutely to
Thai
Thailand.
people knows him.
One thing he did not do, he did not create a single inch of colony. Okay? Now, another country did the same, big naval power, that's Great Britain. Great Britain had a big naval power, immediately created the East Indian Company, and then it's the so-called, the sun never sets on Great Britain. So perhaps the idea of colonizing other people may not be in the DNA of China. It's a country that looks inward. That part of looking inward, I hope China will maintain. Let me give you another example. I hope we have some Japanese colleagues here.
Any Japanese here?
Any Japanese colleagues?
No.
Okay. Now,
No?
what I want to say is, in 1860, around then, the Japanese started the Meiji Reformation. And they went to the West, and they learned from the West. There are three things they learned, at least three things, there might be more. First, they learned the importance of knowledge economy. They saw Cambridge, they saw Oxford, they saw these great European universities. They came back, boom, they start Imperial Tokyo universities, Imperial Kyoto universities. Today are the top Asian universities in the world. The second thing they learn is that these European countries all have military powers, especially naval powers. So the Japanese immediately build a strong naval power and military power, which unfortunately many Asians suffered enormously in the first half of the 20th century because of that. The third thing they learned is very interesting. They saw all of these European countries have colonies. Every single one of them. They also, so they say, aha, colonies are important. So they took Korea and Taiwan as colonies. The only Asian countries that ever had colonies. But they also saw something else. They saw Great Britain, little Great Britain, control huge India for 250 years, right? Around then. They say to themselves, aha, we can control China. Unfortunately, what they did not learn from the British did it by creating a huge cadre of bureaucrats and let the bureaucrats run India. You know, the old saying, the British invented bureaucracy and the Indians perfected it. Unfortunately, the Japanese didn't learn that. They used military power to try to colonize China. Had they learned it, I always say that you and I will be speaking in Japanese today.
Right. Are you sure no Japanese here? I'd like you to stand up and challenge Professor Feng too, no?
So, I think that the idea of China colonizing or demeaning other people, there's no real proof of that. Simply because China's don't go out. And I think that that's how other countries should work with China aggressively in this way. And keep on informing China how important it is that their own dignity be maintained in dealing with China.
Okay, last question. Last question.
Hi, this is Raj Shekhar. I'm studying Masters in Information and Communication Technology.
Where are you from?
Where are you from?
I'm from India. So my question is about entrepreneurs in China. So as you mentioned, China has a very interesting entrepreneurs, like open-minded. Like for example, there is a company named OnePlus. They started 3 years back. Now they have a flagship of 5 versions of the phones, and they have a very sound economic records. So my question is about how entrepreneurs in China are developing in a way that there is a huge change in the market, and how they are competing in those monopoly technologies like they are existing in now here in this present world. And we all have to know that, and we should know this is an important move by China, like this Belt and Road Initiative. And that's my question.
Did you get the question? No. Please rephrase your question, make it short.
Yeah, sure. Just
What is your question?
how entrepreneurs in China are developing in a way that there is a huge
One. And what do you use it most for? Well, you probably call a couple of your friends every now and then. But most important, you use it for taking photos. Now, especially, you have a nice dinner, you take a photo and you show to your family what you have eaten. And often you take pictures of friends and so on. Now, do you know that the most, the 40% of Africa's cell phone came from a little company in Shenzhen? Not Huawei.
No, Huawei.
Okay? Not iPhone.
No.
Why is that? Well, you're pretty dark, so I'm sure if I take Huawei and take a picture of you, I may not see very much. So a little company in Shenzhen say, aha, if I twist and change some of the parameters in the cell phone, and making sure a dark face would really come out looking great, then maybe I could, and so once they did that, 40% of Africa's business is by this company.
So you become white.
Not white. It is still dark, but it's shining.
But handsomer.
Yes.
You look handsomer. Have you got one? If not, then
Yeah.
Professor Feng will
That's right.
get you one.
So I think the Chinese entrepreneurs are all looking for think out of box opportunities outside. That's what I'm trying to say here. And I think that's going to have a lot of opportunities in the future and in working with China.
Well, with that, let's give Professor Feng a big hand for a great presentation and great discussion. Thank you very much, Professor Feng.
Thank you both, Mr. Sutijayun and Professor Feng. If you would stay on the stage. At this time, I would invite our president to deliver a note of thanks to our distinguished panelists and to all attendees for today's event. Mr. President.
Wow, what a morning. I have to admit that this is one of the best public lecture that AIT have ever organized. I have to tell you that I'm so happy that Professor Feng Da-Hsuan accept my invitation to come here. I think what we encountered today is not unexpected. I think I have been receiving a lot of emails from Professor Feng, and I am very happy that we have somebody as academician who tell us his view about the world, which happened already this morning. I also thank him for advising AIT to serve as a platform for international collaboration, especially India and China. I think we have been doing that, but perhaps not enough. Initially, AIT has been sort of regional development agency, you can say that, because we were set up by 8 countries, trying to develop the region. But today, world have changed. Oh, by the way, AIT is not part of Thailand. We serve the whole region, and we are independent non-profit. And in fact, we have no ownership. That means every country are owners of AIT. And today, we change a bit because of the world change. We try to serve ourselves as a platform for international collaborations, not only in Asia, but globally, especially in many issues that a single country or a single discipline would not be able to solve. For example, the climate change that our Vice President mentioned about. Well, this morning is both resourceful and entertaining. It's been made very colorful by Kun Sutichai. I have to tell some background about Kun Sutichai because to my good friend, we have, in fact, 3 of us have been freshman in Chulalongkorn University in the same year. Although Kun Sutichai went to communication arts and we are in engineering. But Kun Sutichai has been today the most established journalism in international affairs, I can say that. In fact, he is more well known than AIT in Thailand. So I would like to thank Professor Feng Da-Hsuan and Kun Sutichai for this morning. And we learned so much, and we hope that we will keep in touch. And hopefully we will invite both of you here more and more, because we get to know one another. And I have your WeChat address now. So again, I would like to thank our audience. In fact, a large number of audience now on the online, because this is kind of live broadcast. Yeah. So thanks for both audience here and online audience. Thank you.
Mr. President, if you could stay on the stage, we have a token of thanks for both of our panelists. Kun Piyapat, please. So, first, a token of thanks for Mr. Sutichai Yoon. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Oh, just so you quickly remember it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Sutichai, we have another gift for you. We have two. Yes. Two. We also thank Professor Feng for his enlightened discussion today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Right. Okay, well, thank you one and all for today. We thank you. The Asian Institute of Technology thanks you. This concludes our session today. It's time for lunch. We will proceed for a group photograph on the stage, so I would invite all of our honored VIP attendees to join the stage, and we will take a group photograph. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.